In Northern Ireland, Brexit is fueling sectarian tensions. More and more Scots are calling for independence, and for many British people, national cohesion no longer seems to mean much. Is the UK sliding into a state crisis after leaving the EU? When Boris Johnson pondered in 2016 whether he should support Brexit or remain in the EU in the referendum, he wrote 2 opposing leading articles. In the end, he decided on the column for Brexit, became the face of the Leave campaign, and later the Prime Minister who was supposed to bring about the exit from the EU. In the article for remaining in the EU, which later became public, Johnson argued that a Brexit supported only by England could lead to the collapse of the United Kingdom. Now this danger seems to be more tangible since Brexit was actually implemented at the beginning of the year. The Sunday Times recently published the results of polls under the dramatic headline "Kingdom Split", according to which half of Scots and Northern Irish and a third of Welsh people want to vote quickly to leave the UK. A commentator for the magazine Foreign Policy already described Brexit as a death knell for the Union. Such eulogies should be interpreted with caution, especially since they often come from the mouths of disappointed Brexit opponents. But Brexiteers also admit that the UK is facing a delicate decade. The political scientist Richard Wynne-Jones of Cardiff University in Wales illustrates this with studies of the complex identities of the British population. According to this, the British, who primarily define themselves as English, voted very clearly for Brexit. Just as clearly, however, those Scots, Welsh or Northern Irish who see themselves more as citizens of their respective nation than as British voted to remain in the EU. That is why Brexit is now fueling anti-English nationalism, says Wynne-Jones. This especially since the government is strengthening the powers of Parliament in Westminster with the Brexit slogan "Take Back Control", which leads to fears of a loss of power in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. In its present form, the United Kingdom has existed since the island of Ireland was split 100 years ago. Now the hard Brexit is heating up the political climate in Northern Ireland of all places. Johnson negotiated an exit agreement with Brussels in 2019, which effectively leaves Northern Ireland in the EU's internal market. That is why goods controls between the British Isles and Northern Ireland are now necessary, and the Protestant Unionists feel betrayed. The fact that Northern Ireland is moving closer to Ireland economically feeds the hope of Catholic nationalists that the dream of a united Ireland will soon become a reality. According to the Good Friday Agreement of 1998, the British Northern Ireland minister must call a referendum as soon as he believes a majority of Northern Irish are in favour of unification with the Irish Republic. A vote is not imminent. According to surveys, around half of Northern Irish people still want to remain British. But with Brexit, a new phase of instability begins in Northern Ireland and denominational tensions threaten to intensify. The danger to British unity is most acute in EU-friendly Scotland. In 2014, 55% of Scots voted against independence. 2 years later, they rejected Brexit even more clearly with 62%. According to Wynne-Jones, not only are nationalists in favour of independence today, but also more and more Scots who also define themselves as British, but are now complaining that the English tore them out of the EU against their will. The Scottish National Party, the SNP of First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, which has distinguished itself as a skillful communicator in the pandemic, is trying to take advantage of this. The SNP is facing a clear victory in the regional elections in May, in which they win a mandate for a second independence referendum. They think they get this if they win. Boris Johnson does not want to allow a new referendum just 7 years after the last vote. But the SNP could become kingmaker in the national elections in 2024, and Labour might be tempted to pay the price of a referendum in order to come back to power for the first time since 2010. The nationalists do not have a convincing plan, and Brexit makes realizing an independent Scotland even more complicated. But the longer London simply refuses to accept a democratically voiced call for a referendum, the more violent the Scottish Defiant reaction is likely to be. There are already plans to hold a vote without London's approval. According to Wyn Jones, polarization is also intensifying in Wales, which is inhabited by many English people and voted to leave the EU in 2016. Brexit is unpopular among the Welsh-speaking population and, depending on the poll, up to a third of all Welsh people are in favor of independence. In his new book, How Britain Ends, the former BBC journalist Gavin Esler argues that the kingdom is less likely to collapse on Irish, Scottish or Welsh nationalism than on English nationalism. The English make up 86% of the total British population. Esler quotes studies according to which 3/4 of all Brexit supporters prioritize leaving the EU higher than the cohesion of the country. And according to the latest survey by the Sunday Times, around half of all English respondents with indifference or even delighted at the prospect of an independent Scotland or a united Ireland. Esler also observed that more and more people in England defined themselves primarily as English and equated English with British interests. Boris Johnson's 2019 election victory was based on anti-European and nationalist sentiment in England. His full-bodied political style is all the less well received in Scotland, where Johnson's campaign for the unity of the kingdom is rather counterproductive. So how can the four nations be re-cemented together? According to The Economist, the number of British people studying or vacationing in another part of the country has decreased, but interpersonal exchange cannot be regulated by the authorities. State reform, as recently proposed by former Prime Minister Gordon Brown, is conceivable. It is true that the government in Westminster has ceded the regions in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland in the areas of health policy or education, which are more important than ever in the pandemic. In England, however, only the metropolis of London has certain powers, apart from that the central state governs. In order to decentralize the United Kingdom, according to Brown's idea, the overpowering England would also have to split up into smaller units. Because there is no successful federal state in the world in which one area dominates all the others too blatantly. Richard Wyn Jones doubts that such a reform can succeed, since the Conservative Party is skeptical of decentralization and most English people simply do not feel like such innovations. The political scientist describes a scenario in which the United Kingdom averts its collapse but slides into he calls it toxic legitimacy crisis, which, like in Catalonia, ignites along national identities. In Wales, a substantial minority would be against the current state order being suspended. In Scotland, even a majority. And a situation looms in Northern Ireland in which both nationalists and unionists feel betrayed. When the House of Commons approved the Brexit trade agreement in December, die-hard EU opponent Marc François declared, "The battle for Brexit is over, but the battle for the unity of the kingdom is only now beginning." The Brexiteers have not yet revealed a sustainable strategy for this fight. But just to make one point absolutely clear, because that name came up again because of Wyn, the situations of Northern Ireland and Scotland are totally different from that in Catalonia and cannot be compared. And even more, they cannot be used to grant or deny anything. Just have to make that clear again, because Brexiteers are bringing that all up and it doesn't fit together. And Tomorrow there's another live stream, and you can still ask questions today on a post on my community tab. Feel free to do so. I'll see you in my next video. Auf Wiedersehen.